Want to take the intellectual long cut? Interested in meaningful banter? Want to find out about activism in the community? Well, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Northern Vibe. I'm Matt Maloney, host and founder of Northern Vibe. Northern Vibe believes in elevating the obscure. We believe in exposing excellence. We believe in cultivating curiosity. We believe in acknowledging achievement, and we believe in shining a light on uniqueness. This is where we engage in open conversations with those who have hidden talents, who have abilities and accomplishments. We seek to understand interesting and informed people, to comprehend and appreciate motivation, to realise rationales. So listen in, eavesdrop. Everyone wants to grow. Now today, I'm holding a conversation with a passionate environmentalist, Geoff Holland. We're going to be discussing crocodiles, Taylor's Point, and a few other topics. Now, before I dive in, big thanks to Andrew Cummings, without whom Northern Vibe simply wouldn't have got off the ground. Also, a big g'day to my mate, Pat McLaughlin at Bad Fishy. I'm not getting any endorsement for this at all. I just want to acknowledge the hard work that him and his wife, Nikki, do as small business people. They're struggling through some pretty tough times now. They're a local business. They're employing people, and as well as promoting tourism in the region. Now, if you're seeking a good time and you want a boat ride, Bad Fishy is the place to go for you. I'm going to have a quick show you. I'll quickly show you their website. So if you jump on Bad Fishy, they're taking bookings right now. As you can see, they have a lot of fun there. And that chap there, that's the back of the head, probably his best shot. That's Pat McLaughlin. And there's a whole bunch of other people that are in there with him. I've been on some of the rides. They're absolutely fantastic. And let me tell you, no one knows the Cairns Inlet better than him. And rolling right along, there's another mate of mine, Monique Oddmark, who owns Unique Property Staging. Yes, I know, Monique, my background is terrible. It needs work. But I'm a book reading nerd, okay? What do you want from me? There's not much I can kind of change about that. I'm not getting any money for that either. Monique was teasing me, so I just thought I'd recognise that. Now, also, if anyone is interested in coming on, or you know someone who should come on, contact me through the Messenger app on Facebook. Our mention in dispatches, well, Geoff's favourite charity is Frog Safe. So I'm going to bring them up again right now too. Now, he's nominated FrogSafe. This is their website. So it's www.frogsafe.com. As you can see there, they're really into frogs and the diseases that are affecting them up here. They're always taking donations. So jump on the website and have a bit of a look there. Now, Geoff's resume is really interesting. Now, it would take too long for me to read out. It's actually, a page and a bit. So I'll get him to kind of tell us about himself. Geoff, welcome aboard.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
No, I assure you the pleasure is all mine. And I got to say, I've really been looking forward to this. So look, let's dive right in. Tell me about you.
Well, I can give you a quick summary of my bio there. I was born in the UK of Australian parents, and we came back to Australia when I was about 9. And I grew up in the Royal National Park, which is just south of Sydney. It's the second oldest national park in the world. And I think that's where I really got a deep appreciation for the natural environment. Since then, from the age of 12, I've been involved in activism of one sort or another. So one of my first projects was to organize shipments of supplies to a clinic in Bombay in India, now called Mumbai. My uncle was over there. He was with the diplomatic corps, and he started a clinic there. So I ended up contacting companies here, sending over supplies. And since then, I lived in Canada for a couple of years. In Vancouver, I was involved with Greenpeace back in 1977. Vancouver is where Greenpeace began, and met lots of very interesting people there. And in the 1980s, I was working with the Peace and Disarmament Movement in Sydney. I became involved in future studies or global future studies. I lived in Berkeley, California, and I've been involved with the World Future Studies Federation, which is a UNESCO-funded organization. A couple of memorable events in my life was attending the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. That's still the largest assembly of world leaders in history. And I went back there 20 years later for the Earth Summit Plus 20 in 2012. So I guess there's some of the main things. I came to Cairns in 1998, and I've been involved in a range of environmental campaigns in the last 23 years now. Just getting to know lots of people here and working with people. You know, as you know, I don't have to explain to people, but it's an incredible place in the world. I've been to many countries, and this is where I choose to live. So I'm doing my best to, you know, contribute to protecting the values that we have here.
And look, it is a pretty impressive resume. Let's be candid, mate. With that, your qualification, I know are you actually scientifically trained, or is it just you're familiar with all the literature and the policy side of things? Is it more policy or being scientifically trained yourself?
Yes, it's more policy. So I have a master's. It's an MA, not an MSc, with honors in science and technology studies, which is basically science and technology policy. But I mean, if you're involved in that area, you have to think like a scientist to a large degree, but then it's also political. So you've got to think like a politician and a social scientist as well. So in a way, it's science, but it's what they call soft sciences, such as, you know, social science.
Again, impressive, to quote Darth Vader, most impressive. So tell me about your family.
Well, I live in Machen's Beach with my wife, and we have two small children who are very aware of environmental issues and all sorts of social issues. And I have two children from previous marriages who I'm lucky enough to say also live in Cairns. So I've got my family all around me, and all have a strong interest in the environment. So my daughter's currently studying for her master's in science in terrestrial ecology at JCU. And yeah.
That's pretty cool. And look, I've got a couple of people asking if questions will be taken, and the answer to that is yes. So if anyone is watching, if you want to jump on, I've got the questions page open. Please don't hesitate to ask any further questions. In fact, besides liking and sharing, which we really need you to do, please tell us where you're from, and don't hesitate to ask anything at all. We're really, you know, Geoff's really open to some suggestions there, as I am as well. So Geoff, tell me about Taylor Point.
I first came in to know about the campaign to save Taylor Point. Now, I think you've got a couple of photos of Taylor Point there, which may help some people recognize it. It's the point between Trinity Beach and Kawarra Beach. And it has a long history. Obviously, you know, there were traditional owners going back tens of thousands of years. And in the 60s, it was owned by Josephine Blessis and her husband. Her husband passed away. And when Josephine died, she bequeathed it to the Anglican Church to be used for youth activities. And indeed, the Anglican Church secured some state grants to build some infrastructure, and they held activities for the youth. I understand up to 40,000 young people were involved. So that was fantastic. But then the Anglican Church decided to get together with a developer and put in a development application for a resort. And that development application failed, and eventually it was sold to another developer called Pretty John, who's had several development applications. And there've been a number of court cases in the Planning and Environment Court where the developers have lost. And a lot of people think, well, it's all bad karma, because that was not the intent of the deed to the Anglican Church. It was left to the community. So amazingly, it's still undeveloped and it's now up for sale. And so we're keen to have a community buyback, and we've launched a crowdfunding appeal and we've had a strong response so far, but we want everybody to get on board. Queensland government says, well, they don't have any money at this time. We should give them credit, however, for buying back Earl Hill last year, which is at the other end of Trinity Beach. So we know it can be done, and we're suggesting spreading the load between individuals, community groups, organisations, businesses, and the 3 tiers of government.
Right. Well, before I go into my next question, big g'day to Dave Peeler. You know, Dave from Brisbane, mate, fantastic to have you on board. So I bet you he's going to have some questions for us later on. Mate, who's going to own, if Taylor Point is bought, who's actually going to end up owning it? Like, if you've got a whole bunch of people who have paid for it, like obviously.
Yep. Well, our suggestion is, and it is, you know, a suggestion, that it actually, well, we want the Queensland government to put in the lion's share. So we're not asking them to buy it outright, but to contribute the lion's share. So it would be owned by the Queensland government, but there would be, you know, obviously restrictions put on that ownership, so they can't sell it, turn around and sell it, or, you know, develop it in a way that's not intended. And then it could come under Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service and be managed by Aboriginal rangers, the traditional owner rangers. So that's the sort of thing that we're going for, but we're open to, you know, discussion. But I think, you know, at the end of the day, the Queensland government, well, it has certain credibility. We don't all trust the government. But I think it would be a way of giving people confidence, and would probably simplify, you know, the whole question of ownership.
Okay. Well, look, yes, that's right. That's right. We've had one of our guests. Indicate that there's been, you know, Indigenous people here for you know, for some time, and the last cutoff for Tasmanian Aboriginals probably happened around about 6,000 BC. But, you know, we know that Indigenous people have been on the rest of the mainland for some time. Look, tell me about charm, and I don't mean the charm that you have personally, old boy, in the James Bond sense. I mean in the organisational sense.
Charm arose after the incident at Munro Martin Park, where council needlessly chopped down trees on the perimeter of Munro Martin Park. Now, Munro Martin Park was developed basically by 4 people in council, and which didn't even include Richie Bates, who was excluded, even though he was the councillor for Division 5. So there was no community consultation. And I was just driving past with my wife one day, and she said, oh, they're cutting down all the trees. Total surprise for us. So I went to have a look, and this fellow was just about to cut down this mango tree, which I knew would have been very old. And the next thing I knew, I was on the other side of the fence. I can't even remember jumping over the fence, to tell you the truth. And he said, you have to get out of here. This is a work zone. I said, yes, it is. And you have to shut down. And he said, well, we'll have to call the police. Anyway, long story. He went away. The site manager came. They went away. So I climbed up the tree. And I was up there for 24 hours. Lots of coverage on media, lots of police, lots of residents. It was a beautiful mango tree. I think we dated it 1910. And its sister tree is still there on the corner of Sheridan and Florence Street. So those two are the same age, and it was covered with pencil orchids. It was beautiful. There was no need to cut it down. In fact, architect Mark Buttrose and I met with council, and he argued that it was actually more preferable to have the entrance between those two trees. Made a lot of more sense. So anyway, I was only up there for 24 hours, but we had other people go up there. We were there for a week until we were infiltrated by the police, undercover police, and we lost it. But I think we'd made our point. And then after that, we thought, well, bugger this, you know, the council are just destroying trees arbitrarily, left, right, and center. You know, we've got to have a different approach. So CHARM stands for Community Heritage Action, Register, Monitoring. And we're also concerned with other heritage values. It could be buildings, you know, old buildings or streets, but mainly it's to do with trees.
Mate, I really want to dive into that a bit more. And something else, there's another question I really want to dive into in regards to nuclear disarmament. I've got to say, this is something that I'm particularly interested in, but I'm getting a couple of questions that are already coming up. And one chap has indicated that he's really keen to get these questions across. We've gone right into climate change already, and I've got to be honest, I did know that was going to be covered, but I didn't think we'd get into it this early. One chap has said in regards to climate change. So mate, can you give us, before I ask the question, can you give us an outline of what you think and where you stand on this issue and what your, you know, so there's no misrepresentation and no misunderstanding of what's going on?
Okay, well, we're in a climate emergency, to put it mildly. We have a catastrophe looming. And to give you just one example, the Great Barrier Reef has lost 50% of its cover since 1990. I used to quote, I think it was 1985, but a recent paper from the ARC-CRC Center of Excellence on Coral Reef Studies, a number of weeks ago put out a paper saying we've lost 50% since 1990. That's mostly due to warming seas. When we get to 1.5 degrees, we lose somewhere between 70 to 90% of the surviving reef. When we get to 2 degrees warming, we lose 99% plus, i.e. it's gone. We are currently at 1.1 degrees warming, but we have 0.7 degrees locked in as carbon lag. In other words, it takes time, with the amount of carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere, it takes time for that to actually have effect. There's nothing we can do about it. So we're already effectively up to 1.8 degrees, way past 1.5 degrees. So the Great Barrier Reef is in big trouble. We should still continue to do what we can to protect it. But that's one example. There's a lot more we're going to lose if we don't take radical action soon. So, you know, either we want to believe the scientists or we don't. But you can basically, you know, there's by far the majority of scientists and climatologists are in agreement with the, not just, you know, the theory and models of climate change, but the seriousness of the situation. So we're in 3 existential crises: global heating, i.e. climate change, the 6th mass extinction, which is related, but they're not exactly the same thing, they overlap. And as you mentioned, the crisis of the threat of nuclear war, which is still hanging over our heads, and I would argue getting worse. And we're in trouble and we need to take that seriously.
Sorry, on that, there's a definite consensus. This chap has indicated, David has indicated he's a climate skeptic, but he's put it in inverted commas. And so rather than paraphrase, I'll read out precisely what this chap says. Climate skeptics don't deny climate change. We admit that it's historically inevitable, cyclical and dramatic. And then he further goes on to say, the objection is to any cost measures which have immediate, certain and dramatic costs on human lives, particularly economically vulnerable people in developed nations. Look, to give him some degree of credit, I kind of half agree with that. And I think that you'd get it, like, coming from, you know, especially, you know, with your experience in India. I don't see this, to give you a really quick background of where I kind of stand on this issue. I'm really concerned about the environment. I'm pro-conservation, but I don't see that as anti-development. I believe that human beings are custodians of creation, but we're also at the center of it. And I think that's where, one of the big philosophical differences that I can see when I speak to, and I've got a lot of green voting friends, where it kind of comes from. It's fundamentally a humanist argument, versus the Peter Singer, I suppose, would be the best way of articulating it. I mean, how do you see the hierarchy? So to get you to comment on David's really, really good question, where would you put the hierarchy? Like, to stop this from being a zero-sum game, is this about preserving human beings? Is this about eliminating human beings? Is this like, where is this going? What outcome would you like?
Well, I don't know, David, and with all due respect, no offense intended, but it's irrelevant. We are in a survival crisis. So it's not a question of, whether climate action benefits one group or another. Actually, people in the developed world stand to lose more than people in developing countries. They're in developed countries, people in Bangladesh, a very low-lying country, people in the Pacific Islands, even in the Torres Strait. These are the people that don't have other resources to rely on to move, for example, to build walls or to go somewhere else. So we're all in the same boat. And we really need to face this issue. It doesn't matter, in a sense, about the economic consequences, because if we don't address this existential issue, there will be no economy. So people who are playing around with this idea that maybe the economy, the growth rate might drop from 3% to 1%, or, our salaries, it's all irrelevant. Now, having said that, there's plenty of evidence out there that we can maintain a strong economy while we transition to a net zero emissions economy. So, and I believe that it's very important. People think that environmentalists know nothing about the economy and care nothing about the economy, but it's very important to have, I wouldn't say a growth economy, because I think that's futile. We need a resilient economy. Perpetual growth, an economy. I'll just say this.
What does that mean?
I'll just say this. An economy that depends on growth to be healthy is not a healthy economy. Now, when I'm talking about growth, I'm talking about physical growth and growth of throughput of energy. You can have products and you can have services, certainly, which don't particularly consume materials and energy. And then you have, so-called economic growth. I'm not talking about that. But the point is that there are very strong, not just arguments, but real life concrete cases of where transition to renewable energies, for example, has created a lot more jobs than coal mines, which are run by automated trucks, in many cases, even automated trains. And so the relative number of people that are employed in the renewable energy industry are far greater than those employed in fossil fuel industry. And just one last example, because I know you're dying to jump in there. We've got 60,000 people involved in the reef tourism industry here. If we lose the reef, we lose all those jobs, and Cairns is 40% of our exports are products and services to do with the reef tourism industry. So we're going to be in big trouble. So anybody who says that, transition to a sustainable economy is too expensive is out to lunch.
I sort of get where you're coming from. I mean, you said a lot, and a lot of it is very compelling. And look, I do agree with some of the stuff. And but rather than me dominate the conversation, because I do have some listeners here who, and it's about the listeners really. One point that has been made is that, well, Indigenous people, and I think this is now why I see why the point was made about Indigenous people with the sea levels rising 100 meters about 6000 BC, which cut off Tasmania. I see what that means now. Now I'm understanding the context. So the point being is, well, you know, we had this massive change of climate, and people kind of adapted to it. So that's fundamentally the way I see that. And perhaps and I hope I'm not oversimplifying and misunderstanding this argument, David, but that's an adaptation. So the Bjorn Lundberg sort of like, well, you know, this is just going to happen. Change is part of what the environment changes, what the climate does. Things aren't kind of like really the same. Never will be the same. We've just got to learn to adapt. The second thing is though, like with the economic thing, again, I just don't think it's and this is me personally. This isn't. Well, hang on, just make sure that David, we've got some. It's going nuts here actually. All right, so there's some discussion in regards to renewable energy, and frankly, there's some questions as to how reliable your stats are in regards to the renewable energy thing versus fossil fuels. That's an episode entirely in itself. There is the indication that it's developed nations who are better able to adapt historically to dramatic climate change, like it's kind of the wealthier nations that do better, and also it's impoverishment. And I think this is the point where I kind of like agree with David on this. When we talk about the economy, like it's always this simplistic idea of like this is dollars versus lives. It's really not about that, because having dollars improves lives, especially when you're really, really poor. I mean, for people like us who are kind of like comfortable, you know, we understand from a lot of the social science around happiness that really once you get enough to keep the debt collectors at bay, a little bit more might make you a little bit happy, but happiness depends on a lot more fulfilling things like that. So, you know, being involved in issues that you think are important to you, or being involved in a church, or being in a, you know, or doing a podcast, or writing, or whatever it is, or, you know, sports, whatever it is that gives your life meaning, point, fulfillment. But the argument, as I understand, is being made here, is that dealing with poverty perhaps should be higher up the hierarchy. And I find that candidly, I find that pretty compelling. What's your take on that?
Well, I think we have to deal with equity, and so deal with poverty in terms of getting more equity into society and helping poor people, you know, earn a better income. And of course, we can look at that internationally, and we need to do more to assist the poorest countries to strengthen their economy. And they want to increase their standard of living. And so we have to pull in our belts, I would suggest. There's a fellow called Aubrey Myers who has a concept of contraction and convergence. So we need to contract to some extent to allow developing countries to increase their standards of living. But I'll get back to what I said before. If we don't deal with this, nobody's going to have a comfortable lifestyle. And that is for sure. We are destroying our natural capital base on which our economic capital is based. So if you destroy the natural capital, you know, our water sources, our clean rivers, our oceans, our soils, our air, if we destroy that, and through climate change as well, then, you know, the economy goes down with it. So it's not a question of either or. It's a question of whether you like it or not, we have to deal with this climate emergency, if you like, so that we can maintain the best standard of living. Because if we don't, the standard of living is going to drop much more.
Look, I'm going to, because mate, there is There is a lot here. I've got, hello to William. David's posting a lot up here, and this is brilliant kind of stuff. I'm going to do my best to encapsulate a number of arguments that have been put there, and this is a bit of an oversimplification. And I know that I am missing. This is going to miss some of the points that have been made, so I apologise for this. But the way it kind of reads, the way I kind of read the environmental movement, and I suspect that the listeners are the same, is it goes something like this. And again, this is just an oversimplification enough for a conversation to start. People out there go, well, are you concerned about the environment? And of course, the answer to that is like, yes. I live in it. I like to hunt. I like to fish. Soil. I get that our wealth creation is of course, there's a symbiotic relationship between that. Again, we're custodians of the earth. Get it all that. It's kind of like asking, do you like puppy and kitten memes? Like, of course, the answer to that is yes. It's a bit of simplistic. But then the people come out and go, well, if you do, you'll have to renounce capitalism. You got to reject democracy, and you've got to give power to a group of unelected, unaccountable philosopher kings. And that's when people...
I think there's a lot of assumptions in what you're saying and a big leap of faith. I don't believe we have to reject democracy. I think we need stronger democracy. And as far as rejecting capitalism, we need to reject what I would call predatory capitalism, and we need to haul in the reins. That doesn't mean to say we don't have free enterprise and a free market, but there is actually no such thing as a free market. All markets are regulated, otherwise capitalism could not function. But we need radically different regulation.
Okay.
And we need, in my opinion, we need to go back to democratic socialism, a model similar to what many countries, the Scandinavian countries, other European countries from the 1980s, 70s, 80s, but maybe we need something new as well. So it's not, I don't think, going back to something we had before is going to help. But just to give an idea of where I think, generally we should be moving, I would say, yes, unfortunately, we need more government intervention in the sense of regulating, and in some industries, public ownership. We need to take back public ownership of certain essential industries. But I think the general model is, say, with renewable energy, we need to have strong government involvement, but also working in parallel with private initiatives and private enterprise as well.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, look, I didn't mean to kind of butt in, but just because, you say a lot of stuff, and again, we're not, there was a couple of moments where I was like, oh no, but like there's quite a few, oh yes moments there as well. I don't know, I've got to be honest, I think democratic socialism is an oxymoron. But what sort of industries were you speaking about specifically?
Well, just on that point, I guess the big difference is, I mean, if you look at countries like, well, China, for example, is a one-party communist state. I don't think anybody is seriously considering a country going to a one-party system. So you could have, if you have more towards socialism, which brings you greater equity, we still keep our multi-party system. And so it's not an oxymoron. It can be a lot more democratic. I mean, I would argue that our system at the moment is not very democratic at all. I mean, you've got Rupert Murdoch owning the media, and he's basically the kingmaker. We think we have a choice, but what do we have a choice between? ALP and LNP, who both bend over backwards to court people like Adani for the Adani mega coal mine. They're in bed. There's a revolving door of officials with private enterprise. They're not at arm's length at all. They're in bed with large corporations, and that's where we need to separate government and private enterprise.
That's where you and I agree. Now, there's a few big disagreements there, and I'm not just agreeing for the sake of agreeing, because I'm really keen to delve into some of the more disagreement issues. But you're right about the nature of what you call predatory capitalism, and I believe has been accurately described as kind of crony capitalism. as you know, I'm involved in an organisation called Boot Brisbane. You know, we want to get a new state for North Queensland. And I've got to be honest, I thought our natural allies would be some of these bigger kind of companies. And mate, they loathe us. They want more government regulation. They really, really don't like the market. They're kind of like, you know, they call it unprofessional when there's all these other people coming in. And what I started to realise, and again, this is just from my personal experience, I've read a little bit of stuff that validates what I'm thinking, but I haven't read any papers, so I'm not going to specifically misrepresent it. There are people who make their wealth from government. So people like civil engineers and stuff like that. And again, it's not bad. Like, you know, they're not bad people. Like, someone's got to make that public infrastructure. But if you have too many industries that are reliant too much on government, and government has allowed them to get too big, you get this symbiotic relationship with them. I think big tech is a really, really, really good example of that right now. Frankly, I just disagree with you on this idea that Rupert Murdoch is somehow sinisterly controlling the media. That's just frankly wrong.
Well, just on that, you go to the Cairns Library and we've got 11 journals there. 9 of those journals are owned by Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
that's not diversity. Back in the 80s, when I was studying communications, there were all sorts of ownership limitations. You couldn't own, 90% of the newspapers and radio stations and TV channels in an area. You could own one of those and one of those, but there were limitations. What happened to that? I mean, that's something that that's something we need, media diversity.
Yeah,
example.
and
yes, I know Rupert Murdoch has huge. I mean, he's not the only one, of course, but there is a very select few people who have, an inordinate amount of political influence, and that needs to change. If we want a democracy, that needs to change.
I agree with you, but like when I say because you're kind of talking about Rupert Murdoch and you're kind of losing because no one reads newspapers anymore. Sorry, Bill, who's on there. He's a great newspaper reader. No one reads newspapers anymore. No one cares. It's big tech. And Murdoch isn't controlling the algorithms. Murdoch's not controlling who you're searching. Like that's simply not happening. And if you look at the leftist bias of the mainstream media, let's talk about the mainstream media excluding big tech, which is kind of hard. But let's talk about the old Murdoch versus ABC, NITV, SBS. That's just like, I simply don't believe the SBS anymore. No disrespect to them. And I know a number of ABC journalists, and they are, they're all people who are doing their best within the paradigm they work in. But I don't believe them. I simply don't believe the ABC anymore. I'm not a Trumpite. I don't kind of believe in these massive conspiracy theories, but that's the way I kind of see it. Because you get the left and the right, both of them are always talking conspiracy theories, and it's not as if it's kind of complete codswallop, because there's definitely collusion. Like, I think there is definitely collusion in the ABC. Like, there is an ethos there, same as the SBS, and undoubtedly for NITV. You just
I'm wondering, Matt, because you're very much involved in an organisation that's promoting Far North Queensland to secede from Queensland. Maybe we can spend some time looking at Far North Queensland in terms of what can we do here to both strengthen the economy. Now, in my view, strengthen the economy means making the economy more resilient. It's not this growth at any, eternal growth paradigm, but it is one that ensures job security, jobs for all, and sustainable jobs. And what can we do for our bit to reduce emissions? I mean, even Scott Morrison says, yes, we need to achieve a net zero emissions economy. So we also have a responsibility in Far North Queensland to achieve a net zero emissions economy, but we're not even tracking our emissions. We're not even on base one. We don't even know what our emissions are here. We need to audit those emissions, and then look at what sort of policies and programs we can implement to reduce emissions in a smart way, in a way that creates jobs, in a way that doesn't hurt our economy. Because reducing emissions, we have to do. For me, I'm not going to argue that point. We have to do it. So what's the best way we can do it to protect our economy?
Yeah, but see, you end up in a circular argument with that. Look, now let's agree with, let's agree on the basic concept that there are some emissions in some places that could be reduced. Okay, again, do you like the environment? Yes. Okay, so kind of what does that mean? Now, if that means no farming, or it means like severe limitations on farming, if it means that, because, and it's probably real, although we don't know exactly, because, these things are actually really hard to measure. Well,
they're not so hard to measure because we do it on a national basis. It's actually quite easy. I mean, if you wanted to measure it in far north Queensland, you'd simply look at electricity consumption and where the electricity is coming from. We can do that rather easily. We can look at imports of petrol and diesel. We can do that pretty easily. And we can look at what are the net increases or losses of tree coverage. Once you've got all those three, you've got a pretty good idea of where we are and where we're going. Now, you mentioned farming. We switched to organic. What's that?
That's always the big rub, that's like, and there's a reason that people are talking about excluding that completely from it. Because
I think that the powers that be are not interested in calculating those indicators, because in Australia, to our shame, and we are the most shameful country of the OECD, we have the highest per capita emissions of any country in the OECD. And that was shown the other week when Scott Morrison wanted to speak at the Climate Summit in London, and they said, no, you're not going to speak because of your track record. And but just to get back to farming, we have an incredible opportunity, and this is not a concession. This is an opportunity to transition to organic farming where it's not positive emissions, it's negative emissions, because you build it up as a carbon sink. And also organic produce has added value. So, we can actually improve our income for farmers by transitioning to organic farming.
Now, yes and no. A lot of that added value is just price increase. So that's really not added value in the truest sense of the word. An increase in price is not added value. It's important to understand that.
If people perceive it has greater value, they're willing to pay more for it, that's added value. Yeah, you're asking an economist, they will tell you that's added value.
That's not wealth creation. That's not wealth creation.
Well, it is if you look at the health benefits. If you look at the health benefits, and if you look at the benefits to the environment and to climate action and helping to avert, climate disaster, then it has huge benefits.
Well, you've just you've just completely redefined what wealth means, if that's the case. I mean, we're no longer talking about dollars and cents. We're not talking about something measurable. So that's a really big redefinition.
I suggest it is measurable. It is measurable. Okay.
Well, some of it is. I mean, we're in the area now of gross national happiness, really. But again, it comes down to, this is, for me, where I start to get really uncomfortable about these discussions, because I sense Peter Singer lurking in the background. This idea that, really humans are a kind of virus on the earth, and anything we do to improve our lives. So if we farm more, we grow more grapes because we want more wine, which is not something you kind of really need, but makes life better, or hops for beer or whatever it is. You engage in these sorts of activities, there is going to be some sort of influence on the environment somewhere. So really the question is always going to boil down to this: are human beings a sort of virus on the planet, or do we belong here? And is it okay for us to be here and exploit? And I use the word exploit a lot of these natural resources to our advantage, not foolishly, again, custodial, because it's this custodial thing. And for me, that's where I get kind of funny. And we've had interviews, admittedly it wasn't me, but it was on the Podbeam. My colleague David Young was doing these excellent interviews, and I'm really trying to encourage him to get back in it once he has the time. He interviewed a couple of our farmers who spoke about green tape, environmental regulation, and the devastating effect it had on their productivity, on their ability to employ people, on everything else. So you've got some people who, again, I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, Geoff, you know I genuinely like you, who kind of like disagree with that. And frankly, Geoff, I find them a little bit more credible when they're talking about that we've got to look after our farming industry, and that there is going to be an environmental cost to this.
Well, can I comment on that?
Yeah.
Number one,
yeah.
Getting back to Cairns and Far North Queensland,
yeah.
what we're doing here, we have a very fertile, narrow strip of farmland, saying, let's talk about Babinda to Smithfield. What are we doing? We're covering it with concrete and bitumen. Is that an appropriate development, or should we be really valuing that very fertile soil for food production? Now, going back to your example, your question as to whether I, for example, consider human species as a virus and something, we should all disappear. The answer is no. In fact, the answer is I am pursuing this this policy, or this whistleblowing, if you like, in the interests of humanity. Because, as I said, we're in a survival situation. It's actually not because of the interests of the biodiversity on the planet. And the reason is we have had 5, let's say, natural mass extinctions. After every mass extinction, biodiversity on the planet has actually increased. Up until, some centuries ago, we had more biodiversity on this planet than we've ever had before after 5 mass extinctions. So presumably after this next one, we'll have even greater biodiversity. There's a catch. It won't happen for 10 million years, or in the case of the greatest mass extinction, it took 20 million years. So I am suggesting that we're actually doing this for selfish human reasons, not for survival of life in general on this planet.
I get that, and I respect that, and I think that's why hell, I don't mind articulating this. That's why, even though I do disagree with a lot of the interpretation, that's why I like and respect you as a person, and that's why I think that we can have these conversations. Because you got to understand the way I see the environmental movement, again, which is something I want to be part of. I want to be I consider myself someone who's concerned about the environment and someone who's concerned about conservation. But in good conscience, I can't call myself an environmentalist. I just can't do that because there's this really nasty Peter Singer, you guys don't belong here.
Peter Singer's more an ethicist than an environmentalist. Yeah. And, one person doesn't characterize a global movement.
No.
I'm not saying I agree or disagree with Peter Singer. I'm just saying I don't think we need to refer to Peter Singer. Let's talk about, and the environmental movement itself is very diverse. I mean, you've got the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, which is closely aligned to fossil fuel directors in the LNP. You've got Citizens of the Great Barrier Reef, which is in bed with big business, Crystal Brook included. And you've got other environmental organizations, which you would have to say are very much on the right side of politics. So I'm sure you can find an environmental group that accords with your political philosophy.
Yeah, it's just that, well, I mean, let's talk specifically about the Greens. Like, I know, Professor Singer's work did influence, the Green Party manifesto. And the reason I know this is because of conversations I've had with Green Party people. So, this is not Matt Maloney projecting his worldview. This is people saying, you want to know what we believe? Read this guy. Okay.
Well, I can assure you I love humanity, and I'm here to try and protect humanity and to warn humanity that we are lemmings going over the edge of a cliff, and we need to do something radical soon to avert that catastrophe.
What would you say to people like Bjorn Lomborg in the Copenhagen Consensus, like guys like that? And what do you say to the Peter Ridds? What do you say to the Professor Robert Carters? what do you say to those guys?
Because I don't have time for them anymore. That period of discussion was at least a decade ago. We've been talking about this for, well, at least since 1992, the Earth Summit. And the time for that is over. I'm not bothered with that. I'm getting on with the change. They can go on raving as much as they want, but they're wrong. There may be some things that they can enlighten us on. And we should always be open to hearing what they're saying, particularly if they're saying something new that we haven't heard before. But I'm not interested in a debate on whether, you know, we should just adapt to global heating, because of course we've got to do our best to survive, including both mitigation and adaptation. But we have to take radical action to reduce our emissions. And even the most conservative governments and irresponsible governments, such as the LNP and Scott Morrison, recognize that Australia needs to achieve a zero emissions economy, net emissions, I should add. However, the truth is we actually need to arrive at a negative emissions economy. But let's not go into that, because I think that will just make some of our viewers pass out.
I think some of our viewers might have heart attacks.
Having palpitations. But you see, we have too much carbon dioxide in the air as it is. We have to take that carbon dioxide, or at least some of the you know, billions of tons we put in there, we have to remove it somehow, as well as not putting any more in there. Unless, and let me just say this, unless there is a new technology that we discover that cost effectively removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now, if that happens, it's a completely different ballgame. But the chances of that happening at the moment are remote. So we can't sit around and wait. We can invest some money into it, and of course put a few bets on that horse. But we can't sit around and say, oh, we'll find a technological solution down the track, because chances are we won't. But if we do, then that changes the whole ballgame.
It's not so much, and look, I do kind of want to wrap this a little bit up, because we've been talking for a long time about it, and I'm really...
And just on that, if we could at some time get, I'd like to say a little bit more about Taylor Point, and I'd like to talk about the spectacled flying foxes just briefly, if we got time for that.
Mate, we got time. Like, we'll come back.
Great.
And mate, we haven't even touched on the nuclear stuff, and I really want to hear you talk about that. But
yeah,
sort of like, just to give the evil conservative point of view on this, we both agree that, yeah, we're doing this for the planet. Yes, we're doing it for the future. The way I kind
of humanity.
Humanity, absolutely. The way I kind of see it is that fundamentally it comes down to risk analysis. And you guys are kind of saying, well, look, it's catastrophic. It's on. Like, this is really, really bad. If we do this, you know, if we don't do this, we're all going to kind of die. Whereas people like me are kind of like looking at it and going, I get it, but, and although there is a consensus, and for complete candor, so you understand, you know, my personal point of view, I find that consensus compelling. It's not something to dismiss out of hand. That's different. I have a very different opinion on models. And, you know, you and I are probably going to disagree. You're just going to have to... Well,
just on that, Matt, yeah. If you research the policies and discussion of not insurance companies, but reinsurance companies, which, as you know, they're the big guys who insure insurance companies. And you look at what they are saying, not to mention, of course, the World Economic Forum. And I've had dealings with people in the World Economic Forum. Now, these are the big players in town. You know, the biggest corporations have a say in discussions of the World Economic Forum. But just look at the policies and practice of reinsurance companies, and that's all based on global heating and the dangers of global heating. And so they are putting pressure on governments to enact radical climate change.
Yeah, but there's a different dynamic with that, and it kind of leads into where I was going. I get that, but like, you know, they're risk adverse, like, and they don't really kind of, they're not as invested as in the wealth creation side of things, because they've got this pot of money that they're sitting on that they may or may not have to give out. So it's that is compelling. Again, like, I'm not being ironic or flippant when I say that. That is a compelling argument. That's not something to dismiss out of hand. But, you know, again, the kind of environmentalist people are saying, really, really critical, got to act on this now. You're going to have to give up some of your freedoms. You're going to have to give up some wealth creations. You're going to have to give up this.
I don't know about giving up freedoms.
Dude,
I didn't say that.
I've done a lot.
In fact, we need to.
Can I just explain what I'm thinking, and then I'll get you to comment. So it's kind of like, and it is going to, you know, respectfully, you're going to have to kind of like accept that it's going to mean giving up freedoms. It just is. It's like, you know, you can't create these industries.
They're not my words. I think we might need to pull our belts in, tighten our belts, but I'm not talking I lobby hard for privacy, to roll back the surveillance state, and to protect freedom of speech.
Damn right.
and liberties. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's where you and I are the same. And that's why, God, man, I'm just enjoying this conversation so much. I can kind of see we're getting a lot of love, Geoff. So other people are really liking this too. It's not just you and me that are really enjoying this conversation. You know, again, thank you very much for coming on. But again, you're kind of saying, you know, you got to make all these sacrifices because it's really, really urgent and dire. And people like me are kind of looking at it and go, if everything that they're saying is true, it does look bad. But there are some other things we can do. And I don't mean carbon scrubbers. I don't mean stuff like that. I mean moving, and, you know, there's all sorts of things that we can do. And you know, Lundberg's pretty good about that too. He goes, you know, when we say adapt, it's not just about the technological kind of things. He's talking about, you know, a lot of ways that we can reframe things and rethink things. Like he's pretty left wing, Bjorn is. I'm just not willing to, and I don't mean for me personally. Like I live a comfortable upper middle class life. I lived in Outer Mongolia for 6 months. I lived in Papua New Guinea as a kid. And look, I know saying this is going to get me in trouble. Australia, while we have wealth disparity, totally get that. I've lived in Arakoon, Lockhart River, get that. We don't have real poverty. And people go to me, oh, we have poverty. No, we don't. Okay, you know, if you think that, you haven't seen real poverty. Look, I've seen poverty. So if we crack down too hard on this, and in regards to that kind of development, it's not just us that's going to suffer. We can give that blood. I get that. We've got a fair bit of fat on us. In fact, we're probably obese societies, and we could probably, you know, it'd probably do us a little bit good, if anything, to kind of calm ourselves down. But I think of the people that I saw in Mongolia. I think of all those sorts of stuff, and you know what? And even places like China, and you know, okay, I loathe the Chinese government, but I lived in China for a year, and I love the Chinese people, and they want to develop. And right now, they're probably the world's, and who are we? I don't even really like to kind of say, you know, say privilege, because I just think that is such God's wallet. But who are we as a relatively wealthy society who've kind of made it through our grit, through our determination, our values? We've kind of like, okay, we've got there to say, hey, we've got here. It's not as good as you think. You don't need to kind of do that. That's just the height of hypocrisy. So
I agree entirely that, and that's why I said before, I mentioned this concept of contraction and convergence. People in Outer Mongolia want a better standard of living, as do people in Chad and, you know, Central Africa and these sort of places. And we should, you know, do our best to assist them. But what are we doing? We're grabbing as many of the resources. We're polluting per capita, you know, several hundred times greater than they are. So we are being quite selfish. Now, that is not to say we should just, you know, ship off all our wealth. It just means we need to reorganize. Now, when I say we need to pull in our belts, there are opportunities there for an even better life and lifestyle that we have now. We can have a better life and lifestyle. It doesn't all depend on, you know, buying a new SUV every few years and having a Mac mansion and having, you know, white boats and all this. That, you know, we can have a great life. And I think I think hospitals, you know, a good health system and the health technology is wonderful. Education. Who was it who said There's enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. So we can have a much better lifestyle than we have now, while not destroying, as I said before, the natural capital base on which our human capital economy depends.
Yeah. I've got it. Oh man, there's so many comments here that I kind of want to read out. But if I read all of these out, guys, we're going to be caught. We're going to be caught on this, and I want to move on. I'm going to ask one quick question before we move back to those other issues. It's from Clinton. What's your opinion about harnessing ocean waves to create electricity?
Well, I'm not an expert in this area, but it's already being done in some places, both wave power generators and tidal power generators already being done. So it's a question of, which are the cheapest technologies. And it seems at the moment that wind technology is the cheapest of all technologies, and then followed by solar and, of course, hydro, better sort of medium or mini scale hydro than the big mega hydro that we did back in the 60s and 70s. But sure, absolutely. And then there's geothermal. You've got Iceland, the US, Aotearoa, New Zealand, they're all, and Maharlika, Philippines, they're all exploiting geothermal. And there's probably a lot of other renewable energy sources that we could be harnessing, absolutely.
Why not nuclear?
Well, there are people in the environmental movement, well-respected people, who are advocating for a return to nuclear. There's one fellow, I won't name him, but somebody I admire very much in Cairns, who's converted 2 houses to, sustainable housing, and he's very much involved. And he advocates for small-scale thorium reactors, and he said that they're far less problematic than uranium reactors or plutonium fast breeders, etc. Look, I'm probably 80% against that idea, but I'm not 100% against that idea. It all depends on, I think the problem is that people think that we can continue the kind of economy that we've got now, that is the sort of the throughput of materials and energy per capita that we have now, and by just switching energy sources. I think we need demand side management. In other words, we've got to, for example, better insulate our homes and find more efficient transport so we don't need as much energy in the first place. If we're going to consume energy at the rate we're consuming now and more, then yes, we're probably going to have nuclear reactors. But I don't think that that's the way to go. I just don't think it's appropriate. So I really don't think we need that. It's a long development time to get nuclear reactors up and running. We still haven't solved the nuclear waste issue. When you decommission them, do they include the costs of the energy, the costs of decommissioning a nuclear reactor in the cost? No, they don't, generally speaking. And so it's not necessarily as cheap as they claim. But, there is room for debate. I personally think we can do it with renewables. And just on that, there's a question of what they call baseline. A lot of skeptics say, baseload, I should say, electricity. Even though I understand the problem is not so much baseload as being able to feed in rapidly higher amounts of energy into a grid when you need it. And that's why the batteries they've set up in South Australia and they're doing in other places in Australia, they're geared for short bursts of electricity. They can come on quickly. They're not geared for long term. Now, we have a great opportunity in North Queensland at the Xtinction Station. Do you know about that?
No.
Okay, the Xtinction Station is located roughly halfway between Cairns and Townsville and out west. It is, among other things, an old mining site, and there's a large solar farm there already. Stage 2 of the project is to build solar pumped hydro. So you have 2 craters there at different levels. During the day, when you get excess electricity, you use that to pump up water to the higher crater. the higher lake, and it's there to be on tap whenever you need it. The amazing thing about this is that it's 80% efficient. That's incredible. I would have been happy with 10% efficient, but it's actually 80% efficient. And okay, it's going to cost almost $1 billion, 900 million, I believe, to build it. But once it's built, you've basically got base load, if you like, storage for, that will manage all the baseload requirements of North Queensland well into the future. So, there's some really promising technologies out there which are not pipe dreams. They're actually ready to go.
Well, suffice to say, we will wrap this, as cool as it's been, we're going to wrap this part of the conversation up. There's some great debate actually going on here too. We've got some people that are really pro-wave swell. There's a chap who's, I know is involved in the insurance company, Hey Sticks, who is indicating that he doesn't agree with your assessment of the banks and insurance companies working in that industry. But again, we'll move on from that. And I want to talk about, mate, let's talk about the bomb. I mean, it's still a real threat. Like, this is not just the 80s kid.
Do you mind if we first of all talk about the spectacle flying foxes and then talk about the nuclear weapons? Because that's something more close to home. I'm just keen to make it. Yeah. All right. So on the 4th of July, the 2020, the Cairns Regional Council began dispersal, I call it eviction, of the spectacle flying foxes from the Cairns City Library camp. Now, this was designated by the federal government a nationally important camp. It's actually, in our view, the most important camp in the Cairns region. And originally council said it would only go on for 5 days. We're now up to day 227. And council has spent they've admitted to spending $563,000 on this, but that was some time ago, and there's been a lot of expenses since. And I just wonder if viewers are aware of the important role of spectacle flying foxes. They're facing extinction. They're officially designated as endangered, but the reality is, according to the scientists, they are critically endangered. So we have a real possibility that they could go extinct within the next decade or two. They are the only long-range seed dispersers and pollen dispersers, but seed dispersers for the wet tropic rainforest, the World Heritage Wet Tropic Rainforest. So we really need to look after them. Anyway, it's important to say that Cairns Regional Council informed or advised the federal government on the 11th of August that dispersal had ceased. Well, it didn't. Dispersal continues to this day, but federal government used that as an excuse to close the authorization with its conditions which were being breached. And so the activity continues. So I just wanted to inform people about that because, you're interviewing me. This is something that I've been involved in heavily throughout 2020 and still to this day. And I think that it's important for people to realize. And I also mention it because, there are probably a lot of people out there, possibly yourself as well, that disagree with, my stance and other people's stance. And so there's an opportunity to, raise some questions and doubts and whatever.
No worries. Look, I've got to be honest. I'm just not all that well informed about that particular issue. So I'm going to have to not so much not engage. Because I kind of don't know a lot about it. One of my indicators, one of my viewers has indicated that he thinks flying foxes make good food.
Well, they have been a food source and a source of medicine for Aboriginal people for millennia. Yeah.
I never got to eat any. There was some Lysissa running rampant when I was up in Lockhart in Cowan. But
what do we think about a keystone species that's facing extinction? Are we concerned, or so what?
Because I just don't know the stats, so I just gonna leave that one.
Yeah, well, to let you know and your viewers know, in 2004, the population was estimated at 250,000. At the beginning of 2018, that had already dropped to 75,000. In 2 days, in November in 2018, when we had a heat stress event or heat wave, we lost 23,000 in 2 days. That's 30% of the national population in 2 days. So now we're down to about 52,000. The last report I saw from CSIRO, which went to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, they estimated that the population is now down to 40,000. So, you know, we could all shrug our shoulders and say, look, we're not informed, so we don't have an opinion. Well, I think we should be informed and we should have an opinion. And if people have, you know, views to the contrary, let's talk.
Yeah, and you know, that's fine. You know what? I promise you, I'll look it up. But there are a number of, by way of explanation, there are a number of issues that are taking up my time as well. I got a lot to read. But look, what was the other issue you wanted to cover off on before we go?
Well, just to round off the chat about Taylor Point, just to let people know, there's a Facebook group called Buy Back Taylor Point Cans, and we have this community crowdfunding buyback. Lots of people have so far contributed. So if people are interested in having Taylor Point come back to the community so we can all enjoy it, rather than just an elite few, yeah, come and visit Buyback Taylor Point, and you may be interested in making a contribution. At this point in time, it's expressions of interest. And when we get a good momentum, we'll then start a crowdfunding account on chuffed.org. But at this stage, we're just calling for expressions of interest.
Okay, and I can, while you were talking away there, I am now in a position to show that, hang on.
That's the one?
So the Facebook page. So hang on, I'll bring that up again. So that's it. So if you search that in the corner, that's where it'll come up. So, all right, mate, we've actually gone a little bit of over time, but we're still getting a fair bit of love on the Facebook page. So we'll, I can't read that, Jason. So we'll continue. We'll continue on to the nuclear. We'll continue on the nuclear thing. And look, this might sound obtuse, and I understand you wanted to talk about local issues first. That's really good, actually. And before we kind of move into it, promoting the new state kind of thing, the Boot Brisbane. One of our little mottos is, you know, you and me without the 73. Because I genuinely believe with the new state movement, like if we draw a line, say a little bit south of Gladstone, like you and I have some different worldviews, Geoff, but we share more in common than we don't. And the other thing is, because we're both passionate people living up here with skin in the game, I think it's you and I that are in positions to make the better decisions as to what we should be doing with the environment. So, you know, what parts of the environment we should lock up and just not touch. You know, where the line of what sustainability means when we kind of say it, where that line is, where are we going to draw these lines? What are we going to do? Are we going to allow wealth creation there? Are we going to, you know, I think chaps like you and me in good conscience, along with the other excellent supporters we've got, one of the things I've been kind of thrilled about is we're getting a bit of it's a small but growing groundswell of Indigenous involvement in this, and I absolutely love that. I got to be honest, and I don't get misty-eyed about Indigenous issues, but I really find it very reassuring that's happening. And we've got I'm getting quite a few people from the Chinese community who are coming on board now too, and with a few of the guests that I've got lined up in future, I suspect we're going to get a lot more. So it's I really think that you're kind of right there, that you and I are the people to sit down and kind of make these, you know, in good conscience and well informed to make these decisions. Nuclear armament, although it is a global big issue, and it doesn't seem to, you know, people say, well, how's this going to affect us here in Cairns? Well, no, it matters. It matters a lot. and the potential for, destruction of human civilization, if not all of human life, is a bit of a big deal. Can you talk about that, Geoff?
Well, since 1947, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which sounds like a journal, but it's actually a group of scientists, have put out a report which is called the Doomsday Clock, where they point, so many minutes to midnight, and the closer you are to midnight, the greater the danger they perceive we are in. Well, as of last year, we are closer to midnight than we have been since 1947. We're now at 100 seconds to midnight. And I must point out that they do now include climate change in that assessment. That's the one, 100 seconds to midnight. And part of the reason for this is because of new technologies, weapons technologies that are coming online now. And they include, for example, the transition from supersonic ICBMs or missiles to hypersonic, which travel, Mach 4, Mach 5, Mach 7, which means that we have much less response time. If, for example, there's an accidental launch or there was no launch at all, but, the warnings have gone off. And so president has to make a decision as to whether to get their missiles out of the silos before they're hit. So that's one of the worrying trends at the moment. Another one is the trend toward autonomous weapons. And I'm not saying that applies to nuclear weapons at the moment, but the risk of something inadvertently going wrong because of some algorithm that's gone haywire, and then that quickly escalating into nuclear war.
Cyberdyne.
And yes, and what was the third issue I was going to mention? Oh yes, the current production of smaller, in quotes, smaller nuclear weapons, which are being referred to as usable nuclear weapons. In other words, we can have a tactical nuclear war, and to believe that that won't escalate into a full scale. But even, what the hell is a tactical use of a nuclear weapon? Nuclear weapons, the ones that they dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were extremely small nuclear weapons. Yeah. They were 10 kiloton. As opposed to ones that are megatons, hundreds, if not thousands of times larger. So that's one of the reasons why the clock, the arms of the clock are closer to midnight than ever before. And we need a debate. Now, you may remember in the 1980s, we had huge rallies. There was a global peace and disarmament movement, which basically forced Reagan and Brezhnev to the table to actually destroy a large percentage of nuclear weapons. But we still have, I think it's around 19,000. We only need a few hundred to destroy all the major cities in the world. So we still have a long way to go. The other thing that we need to mention is that on the 22nd of last month, of January, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons came into effect. And this is something Australia needs to get behind. Well, we need to sign it and ratify it. And Aotearoa, New Zealand has already signed and ratified a long time ago. 51 countries have signed and ratified. There's another 30 or so that have signed but not yet ratified. Australia, I'm ashamed to say, was involved in the early negotiations of this treaty, but they were referred to, and you can Google this, as the Weasel Nation, because our role there was to undermine the whole process so that the treaty would tank. And we were doing that at the behest of the United States. So we really need to take a good look at ourselves. Australia in the past took a leading role in nuclear disarmament. And I think we need to get back to that, the role that Australia was famous for then. well regarded for then, but somewhere along the line, we sort of went off the rails. And I have to say, the global peace movement is very quiet these days, when in fact we should be more making more noise than ever.
Yeah. Well, look, we will, mate. We're over time. We've gone way over time, and I think it's just it's because the viewers have loved this conversation. I know I most certainly have. One of the things I'll kind of wrap it up on, and this will be our last question. And look, I'm really sorry to a lot of our viewers out there. There's just so many questions that are going back to the climate change debate that I just can't go back to, because we will be here. We'll be here all night, as cool and as tempting as it is. But look, a lot of the discussions, and this is to give some recognition to the discussions that are happening on the page around the science and who means what and the interpretation of all that. And you kind of said that you kind of don't give any credibility to those other guys, and that's fair enough. Like I'm not scientifically trained.
Well, that debate is over. If they've got something new to say, let's look at it.
Well, here's the thing. What the climate change debate really reminds me of in scientific, one thing I'm kind of familiar with is history. Now, anytime I'm talking to any scientific friends, they always throw Galileo at me, in the scientific materialists that I know, and I know quite a few. They go, well, the whole Galilei situation, that was just about religion trying to crush science. And I go, no, it wasn't. They're like, what? No, it was. That's not what was happening with that. To give you the briefest overview of kind of what happened was, Galileo, of course, didn't conceive of the idea of a heliocentric solar system. That was Copernicus. What he did is to get evidence to validate it. Now, the church at the time really was the establishment. It was the intellectual establishment. It would be like the IPCC, all of these other, the UN, all of these other kind of...
I wouldn't like to equate the church with the IPCC at all.
Well, back then it was, because if you had a brain and you were doing research, that's where you...
But they weren't scientific. The church wasn't scientific. They were all about mythology. Well, the IPCC is based on science. There's a total difference there.
No, that's kind of not true, and you'll see where I'm going with this. The church was, at the time, the scientific consensus was Ptolemy's theory. Now, the Ptolemaic theory that, he was a Greek, a pagan Greek, who had come up with the theory of the spheres, as he called it, and people were defending it really hard at the time. Now, the consensus was that was the kind of consensus, and the issue became authority. It wasn't really about religion versus science, mythology, as you call it, versus the scientific method. That's kind of just really, that's not what was happening at the time. And although science, as we know it, hadn't fully developed, I respectfully remind you that this is in the time of, guys Newton was born very shortly after this happened. So to say that it was a pre-scientific age just kind of wouldn't be accurate. It's not completely wrong.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the church was not based on science.
Well, it was based on the science and the reason at the time, and the best theory they had at the time was the Ptolemaic theory. So when this challenge came up, what happened to Galileo? Like he was showing the sticks and go, but this is what's gonna happen to you, and that's kind of what's happening, really. That's kind of what's happening to Reid. That's kind of what's happening to Carter. That's kind of what's happening to Lundberg. That's kind of what's happening to anything else. And from my really basic understanding of science, science isn't a body of knowledge. That's not the way it works. Science is a process. The whole point of science is to have an established, we've got this established body of knowledge. Let's test it. Now, when you've got a consensus, that's really compelling. You don't ignore consensuses. Only a fool does that, especially when you have a consensus of some of the greatest minds in human history. But a consensus isn't evidence. it's only evidence of the ability of people to kind of get together and form.
All you got to do is look at the evidence. All you got to do is look at the scientific evidence.
Yeah, but see,
that's all you have to do.
But if you've got credible people challenging it and going, no, this isn't true. So if you've got Peter Ridd and Jennifer Morosi, and you've got other people kind of saying, well, you know what? No, the reef isn't dying. It's dying in this area, and it's dying because of this, this, and this.
The claims of people, well, these climate skeptics that you've been referring to have been deconstructed. You know, while there have been people who've stood up and spoken against the scientific orthodoxy and have been vindicated, there are many, many times the number of others who have stood up against scientific orthodoxy, and future history has shown that they were incorrect and that the orthodoxy was in fact correct. So if you want to portray the IPCC as orthodoxy, and people like Peter Ridd, who is not a climatologist, as being these, you know, people who have courage to stand up with other evidence to contradict the orthodoxy, I would say, well, they're one of those people that history will show that they were wrong in the main. I mean, I've talked to Peter Ridd on a number of occasions. You know, I said, well, you know, do you believe in anthropogenic global warming? He said, yes, but I'm soft. In other words, he says it's not happening as urgently as people make out. But he basically agrees that we have a problem with anthropogenic global warming. So that's a starting point, whereas a lot of the climate skeptics will say, oh, no, it's just a natural process. Look at what happened in the past. May I say, in the past, you referred to 10,000 years ago when the coastline was, you know, out at Michaelmas Cay. The changes that happened there were a lot slower than they're happening today. And, you know, so people could adapt. And yes, probably a lot of species went extinct then. But we're the ones causing it in the main now. So we have a responsibility to, you know, to correct the problems that we've created.
And I've got to say, that is, so, you know, that's something where the tussle is within me personally, and I can't speak for all of the readers, but reading some of the comments, I know that this is where some of them lie. Like, are we a very powerful species? Probably the most definitely the most powerful in our known universe. Yes. Is our activity changing, contributing to the change of the climate? Yes. But this is where I kind of like, and this is, you know, I got to be honest, I find Carter really, really, you know, I find him really compelling on this. And I find Ridd compelling too, because the whole thing is, and you've acknowledged that too, these guys are not like tinfoil on their hats going, we don't need to do anything. Can I get some money from big oil? That's not what's happening. Like, yes, they're saying, you know, there is, and same as Lumberg. It's like, yes, there are these issues. Yes, it's kind of important. But basically, you know, Carter, to kind of oversimplify and paraphrase him, kind of says that human beings are impacting on the planet, but it's probably not as much as we think. In fact, it's probably in the background. And again, so that comes back to this. So if we're going to make these massive changes in our political and economic system that have got us to this point, and pretty well, and again, reminding everyone, because, you know, we want the same thing, that the wealthier a country is, the more it can afford to sustain things, and the better the environment, the better the environment.
Depends how it achieves that wealth, or it achieves that wealth.
Yeah, but like, the better the environment is. So if you're in an Anglosphere country, and you know, you're probably doing the best. Either, you know, there could be some argument as to whether or not the Scandinavian countries are doing better, or you know, some of the other Western European countries. But definitely speaking about the industrialized Western world, you know, the forests are coming back in Europe.
Not in Australia. We're have one of the worst records of land clearing in the world. comparable to Amazon, Borneo, and Congo, New South Wales and Queensland.
But some of it is, yeah. Anyway, look, I promised we were going to wind this up because, like, again, we're doing that for food. But one good point that you did make was the fact that, and this is just part of human settlement. I think this is where you really are onto something about the rethinking stuff. But that, as soon as I say this, you're going to have these issues with transport. We naturally want to settle in fertile areas where the food is, a la Cairns, a la Bundaberg, a la those sorts of places where there's water and good soil. And like you said, what do? Well, we kind of put concrete over it and build houses on it, which
Very silly.
Well, yeah, I get it. Like that's a really compelling argument, and it's a big oversimplification because it's not happening everywhere all the time. But it's like there's a real degree of truth to that. So that's one of the kind of. But then, okay, so we're going to build cities, we're going to build our settlements in not so fertile areas. Well, you still got to get the food from A to B, and how. So but there is. It's not that, and I don't consider myself a skeptic in the sense that, like, I believe climate change is happening. I believe human beings are impacting on it. I don't think it's as much as, frankly and respectfully, I just don't think it's as much as what you're saying. And it's not that I don't care. And if you're speaking to your friends in Xtinction Rebellion, and if you're speaking to your friends in the Green Party and everything else, the thing that really annoys, and I know I'm speaking for everyone else here, that really annoys the hell out of us is when the people are going, it's because you don't care. Because you don't care. You don't care about the future. You don't care about kids. You don't care about the planet. Dude, I find myself reaching for my Glock when I hear comments like that. It's like, how dare you? Because then you've just changed the entire argument. It's no longer about, can you and me sit down without the 73? And that's why you and I get on so well. And that's why the coppers like you so much. That's why you're the perfect face for Xtinction Rebellion. That's why you're the perfect face for all these things. Because you're a passionate guy and you believe what you believe, but you don't get into these ad hoc, you don't get into these personal attacks. You don't go for the man. You go for the ball and go, well, have you considered this, Matt? And, you can have these discussions. But seriously, like, you read the media, and it's the mainstream media, let's be honest. It's like, people saying, well, climate change skeptics, so people who are questioning the narrative, which includes me in the, qualified, nuanced sense that I gave. Because, really, I'm in that because, it's criminal. You're a bad person. You need to be locked up. You need to be sent to a re-education camp. It's like, okay, well, again, you've just brought in another dynamic. So now the dynamic isn't even really about the environment stuff anymore. It's about the power that you have over me and you making moral judgments about me. And, that kind of, this makes me, like I said, it makes me want to reach for my Glock. It's like, dude, don't say that. Like, no, wrong, bad. And that's where you're getting a lot of this polarization. Anyway, I've really enjoyed this conversation. And yes, we're still getting comments about the reefs and about everything else. And yes, the peace movement only gets a run in Western democracies. Sticks, you didn't offend me. What's the matter with you? How long have we known each other? Stop the bombs, dude. Stop the bombs. We're going to wrap it up on that. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I can tell everyone else has too. Please like and share. If people don't like and share, we don't get the numbers. So you've got to do that for us. If you've got any suggestions in regards to guests, please don't hesitate to drop them to me. I don't know precisely who I'm going to be interviewing next week. I've got a choice of 3 people. It's either going to be an academic, a musician, or an artist. I'm not sure which. Oh, no, or there's another person who might be doing the health, lifestyle, fitness, all that sort of stuff as well. I'm not precisely sure which one of the 4 excellent, interesting people that I'm going to be in. Geoff, thank you very much for coming on. Really.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
No, great, mate. I'll get you to stay on just for a second, but I'm going to end the broadcast now. So thank you very much to all the vibers out there. Don't forget, follow, like, share, tell your friends.